You ever wonder how one simple choice, one single sacrifice on an ordinary day, could completely change a man's life forever? Well, let me take you into the heart of this story, because what happened one cold Thanksgiving evening to a small-town mechanic named Daniel was something no one in our community will ever forget. It wasn't just about a car, or a family stranded in the freezing night up. It was about a man who put his own comfort aside, gave up his holiday dinner, and discovered that fate had something bigger waiting for him than he ever imagined. This story begins in a quiet little town tucked away in the Midwest, where the nights get long, the winters bite hard, and Thanksgiving is one of the few times when every family gathers around the table to forget their worries. Daniel, or Danny as most folks called him, was a mechanic through and through. He owned a modest garage on the edge of town, a place that smelled like grease, motor oil, and coffee no matter what hour you walked in. His hands were always scarred and stained, his nails permanently darkened with work. He wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but he was known for honesty, known for staying late if a neighbor needed a fix, and known for being the kind of man who wouldn't turn you away even if your wallet was thin. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be special. His mother, who hadn't been well lately, was making her famous turkey again, just like when he was a kid. His sister was flying in with her children, his nieces and nephews who adored their Uncle Danny. The house would be filled with laughter, warm food, and the familiar sound of family catching up. For Danny, who often spent holidays alone in the garage because of emergency calls, this was his chance to finally sit at the table, breathe in the joy of family, and forget about busted engines for one evening. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. That afternoon, the snow had already started to fall, big heavy flakes sticking to the ground, frosting the roads, and sending most folks inside early. The garage was closed. The "Closed for Thanksgiving" sign hung crookedly on the door, and Danny was just washing the grease off his arms, humming to himself as he pictured the smell of roasted turkey filling his mother's house. His phone buzzed. At first, he thought about ignoring it. After all, everyone knew the shop was closed, and today wasn't a day for business. But something in him, maybe habit, maybe that voice of Daniel, made him wipe his hand on a rag and check the screen. It was an unknown number. He frowned, debating, then swiped to answer. "Hello?" he said, expecting maybe a telemarketer or someone who had dialed wrong. But what he heard on the other end wasn't that. It was panic. A woman's voice, shaking, almost crying. She explained that she and her family were stranded on the highway just a few miles outside of town. Their car had broken down, the temperature was dropping fast, and they had no one else to call. They'd been trying every number they could find, and his came up online as the nearest mechanic. Danny's first instinct was to explain that it was Thanksgiving, that the garage was closed, that maybe they should call roadside assistance. But then, he thought of that family stuck in the snow, maybe with kids in the back, scared and cold. His stomach twisted. He looked at the clock. Dinner was just an hour away. His mom was waiting. The kids would already be bouncing around the living room. He could practically smell the gravy and pie. Yet, on the phone, this woman's voice was trembling with fear. "Please," she said, "we don't know what else to do. My husband tried to look under the hood, but the broken bar, it's just dead. And it's so cold out here. We've got our little girl with us." Danny swallowed hard, the weight of the choice pressing down. His entire Thanksgiving versus helping strangers, a holiday of warmth versus a freezing roadside with tools in hand. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Text me your location," he finally said. "I'll be there soon." The voice on the other end broke with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." He hung up, grabbed his toolbox, pulled on his thick jacket, and stepped out into the swirling snow. His old Chevy truck rumbled to life, its heater barely keeping up with the icy wind. As he drove down the empty streets, past houses glowing with the golden light of family dinners, Danny couldn't help but feel the pang of sacrifice. Everyone else was gathered inside, clinking glasses, saying grace, passing plates of mashed potatoes, while he was out here chasing red hazard lights on a frozen highway. Still, a part of him knew this was the right thing to do. That gut feeling, that voice that had guided him so many times before, told him that sometimes the right road is the harder one. The snow thickened as he pulled onto the main road out of town. His headlights cut through the white curtain until finally, in the distance, he spotted them. A minivan sitting awkwardly on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing like desperate beacons. He pulled up behind them, parking at an angle to block the worst of the wind. The family inside looked startled at first, then flooded with relief when they saw him step out with his toolbox. The woman he'd spoken to rolled down the window just enough to call out, "Oh, thank God you came." Her husband got out, shivering in a thin jacket, his breath coming out in sharp clouds. "I didn't think anyone would actually show up tonight," he admitted, rubbing his hands together. "It just died on us, and I couldn't figure it out. Battery's fine. Fuel's very broken, bar I don't know." Danny gave a firm nod. "Let's take a look," he said simply, popping the hood. The engine was dark, silent, the kind of failure that could stump even seasoned mechanics. But Danny had something most didn't: patience and instinct. He checked the wiring, the belts, the fuel line. His fingers were freezing, but his mind was sharp, tracing possibilities. Meanwhile, he couldn't help but notice the little girl peeking from the back seat, her big eyes wide with fear and curiosity. She clutched a stuffed bear, her cheeks flushed from the cold seeping into the van. Danny smiled at her for just a second before turning back to the work. "We'll get you warm soon, sweetheart," he murmured under his breath. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the snow piling on his shoulders, the wind whipping at his face. Finally, after what felt like a last desperate try, he adjusted a loose connection, tapped the starter relay, and signaled for the husband to turn the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared back to life. The headlights brightened, the heater kicked in, and a wave of relief spread over everyone. The wife gasped, tears springing to her eyes. The husband let out a shaky laugh, clapping Danny on the back so hard his teeth rattled. The little girl squealed from the back seat, hugging her bear tighter. "You saved us," the woman said softly, her voice breaking with gratitude. "You really saved us." Danny smiled, brushing the snow from his beard. "Just doing my job," he said quietly, though inside, he felt the weight of what he'd given up. He packed his tools, waved them on their way, and stood on the side of that highway for a long moment, watching their taillights fade into the storm. Alone now, he climbed back into his truck, feeling the silence press down. Dinner was surely already over. The laughter, the warmth, the gathering, oh, he'd missed it all for strangers he might never see again. He sighed, turned the key, and headed back toward town, not knowing that this choice, this single night of sacrifice, was about to change his life forever in ways he could never have imagined. When Danny pulled his old Chevy back into town that Thanksgiving night, he expected nothing more than an empty plate waiting for him at his mom's house and the faint smell of leftovers. He parked in the driveway, staring at the glowing windows of his childhood home, feeling both proud and hollow. Proud that he'd helped strangers in need, hollow because he'd missed the one thing he'd been longing for, a seat at that warm dinner table with his family. As he stepped inside, the house was quieter than he expected. His nieces and nephews had already gone to bed, the living room was dim except for the flickering TV, and his mother, wrapped in her shawl, sat on the couch with a soft smile. "You missed dinner," she said gently, not accusing, just stating a fact. Danny sighed, running a hand over his damp hair. "I know. A family broke down on the highway. They had a little girl with a broken bar. I couldn't just leave them there." His mother's smile deepened, full of pride. "That's who you are, Danny. You've always had a heart that puts others first. Dinner can be reheated, but kindness like that, it matters more than you realize." He didn't know it then, but her words would prove truer than anything. The next few days passed quietly. Snow continued to blanket the town, and Danny threw himself back into the rhythm of the garage. A few oil changes here, a brake replacement there, the usual hum of small-town life. He didn't think much about that stranded family. Just another night, another roadside call, at least, until the following Tuesday. That morning, he was elbow-deep in a transmission when the garage door creaked open. He looked up, expecting one of his regulars, maybe old Mr. Harvey coming in to complain about his truck again. Instead, It was a man in a perfectly tailored coat, snow dusting his shoulders, stepping inside with a presence that didn't belong in this greasy little shop. Behind him came the woman Danny had seen that night, her eyes lighting up with recognition, and beside Hero holding her stuffed bear was the little girl. Danny froze, wrench still in hand. "You," the man said with a wide smile. "You're the one who stopped for us, the mechanic who gave up his Thanksgiving." Danny set the tool down slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, that was me. Glad you all made it home safe." The man chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "Safe? You saved us. You don't even know." He extended a hand, firm and confident. "I'm Charles Whitmore. This is my wife, Evelyn, and our daughter, Sophie." The name didn't register at first, but then it hit Danny like a punch. Charles Whitmore wasn't just some random traveler. He was the Charles Whitmore, a billionaire industrialist, a philanthropist whose name was on hospitals and schools, a man Danny had only ever read about in newspapers. He was in their small town visiting Evelyn's parents, keeping it quiet, flying under the radar. And here he had been, stranded on the highway like any other man. Rescued not by a limousine service or security detail, but by a grease-stained mechanic in a rusty old Chevy. Danny blinked, his mind spinning. "Yeah, broken bar, I didn't know who you were," he stammered. Charles smiled warmly. "That's exactly why it matters. You didn't help us because of who we are. You helped us because of who you are." Evelyn stepped forward then, her eyes glistening. "We couldn't stop thinking about that night, about how you missed your holiday for us. You'll never know what it meant to see a stranger put our family first when no one else answered our calls." Little Sophie tugged at Danny's sleeve, looking up at him with innocent eyes. "Mommy says you're a hero." The words melted something inside Danny, a warmth deeper than any Thanksgiving dinner could have given him. He knelt down, smiling softly. "I'm no hero, kiddo, just a guy with some tools and a truck." Sophie shook her head, clutching her bear tighter. "You're our hero." From that day forward, everything changed. Charles returned the following week, this time not just to thank Danny, but to make an offer. He told Danny about a new foundation he was building, one dedicated to helping struggling families with transportation needs, of fixing cars for single parents, providing safe vehicles for people who couldn't afford repairs, ensuring that no one would be stranded like they had been. "I need someone I can trust to run this," Charles said firmly, his voice echoing in the little garage. "Not someone chasing profit, someone with a heart for people. I want that someone to be you." Danny stared, stunned into silence. Him, the small-town mechanic who barely made ends meet, running a foundation backed by one of the wealthiest men in the country? It felt unreal. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. Charles grinned. "Say yes. You've already proven you have what it takes." Over the next few months, Danny's life transformed. He traveled with Charles, met people whose lives were changed by a simple car repair, saw mothers cry tears of relief when their broken-down vans were fixed free of charge. The foundation grew quickly, spreading across towns, and Daniel, once just a guy in a grease-stained jumpsuit, was now the director, the beating heart behind it all. Yet, even as his world expanded, he never lost his roots. He still showed up at the old garage sometimes, sleeves rolled up, helping neighbors who came by. To him, it wasn't about fame or money. It was about that same choice he'd made on Thanksgiving night, a choice to put others first. And what about his family? That next Thanksgiving, there was no empty chair for Danny. This time, he was at the head of the table, his nieces and nephews listening wide-eyed as he told them about the places he'd been, the people he'd met, the lives touched by a simple act of kindness. His mother looked on with pride, her eyes shining as if she'd known all along that his heart would lead him to something bigger. Evelyn and Charles even stopped by that holiday, bringing Sophie with them, who ran into Danny's arms as if he truly were family. The house was filled with laughter, with warmth, with something deeper than tradition. Gratitude.